Hey, welcome back to Jigs on Twitch. Back today with a pretty unique take on what I would call green-white Terravore. This is from Patron ThatMaverickJoe, who came to me with a few lists around the green-white Terravore base. So obviously here you can see that the deck is essentially a green-white build of what you would typically find in Maverick or Depths decks, with a bit of an added strategy of Terravore, which is a creature that gets as big as the amount of lands in all graveyards. White Orchid Phantom, which allows you to destroy lands and allow your opponent to search up for basics. We have Armageddon in this build. We have Armageddon in this build. This one's a little bit more Maverick-y with the Green Suns packages of things like Tireless Tracker, Questing Beast, Titania. This one has Stoneforge Mystic. And then this one's kind of built towards what the deck essentially wants to do. So go after your opponent's mana, ramp into big creatures that most likely take advantage of your graveyard and how many lands are in there, and then win from there. And that kind of got me thinking around how to structure a deck. I'm probably pretty new when it comes to actually building a deck from scratch instead of just taking what's already there and playing around with that. And one thing that I really like is actually from the Walking the Plains MTG series, which I highly recommend for anyone who enjoys Magic-related content. This is something that I would watch on a plane if I was on a plane for 17 hours. I'll just download all of these and watch them back to back because I think the quality is great. The information you get out of them is fantastic. The nostalgia is great, even for the time periods before I even played Magic. I think it's just a really, really well put together series. And part of these series include visiting tournaments and covering the top 8. And one thing in particular that I really enjoyed about these was that the players in the top 8 have these sort of elevator pitch one-liners about what their deck does. And it's kind of a way, instead of saying, I made top 8 with Merfolk, this player is saying, with my Merfolk deck, there's nothing better than playing a Lord, and another Lord. And you kind of get a good grasp of what the deck is about without having to see the whole deck, without having to kind of understand what the wider strategies are of a deck. You can kind of see what is the one thing you want your deck to do, or how would you sum up your deck in one stance. There's one with Ben Stark who says turn 1 Matter Accelerant, turn 2 Knight, and then start searching up with Wastelands, which is pretty much exactly what Joe is looking for here, but replace the Knight with Terravore. So looking at the 3 versions, what we have is a pretty good base. And what you can see here is typically what Joe's wanting to put together, with a bunch of lands, a few creatures, and then the classic green-white non-creature spells of Swords for removal and Green Suns for tutor ability. We then also have Path to Exile in the sideboard, and Gadok Teague as a Green Suns target for some of the more unfair matchups where green-white is just a little bit too fair against most of the time. So the thought here is, what's the elevator pitch? So typically it is disrupt your opponent's mana early on and then play bigger creatures that are going to close out the game before your opponent kind of catches up to your mana or gets their mana in line. So with that in mind, that's a really good start. It's really good to start from those 3 lists with Stoneforge Mystic, with a big Green Suns package of just, I want to go after my opponent's mana, and then want to play big creatures that just, close the game out in a few turns. So with the skeleton, it's kind of a case of going, okay, this is essentially what the deck wants to do. We have Reclaimers to find Wastelands, use Flagstones to ramp. We have Noble Hierarch as another great accelerant to play, a turn 2 Terravore or a turn 2 Ramunap, or get White Orchid Phantom online, thanks to that double white pip. Can be a little bit tough to maybe cast without the Noble. So I really like seeing the starting point of where we need to be, and then thinking about, okay, what are some things that can help our strategy I want to do? What are some things we need to respect and should probably make room for in the main deck? So if there's a lot of artifacts around, maybe we should have a Collector Ouphe as a Green Suns target, or maybe we should have Thalia as a way to build on the mana denial strategy of the deck, but also have something against the unfair decks where we can't go 100% just all in on the sort of Terravore land destructing package plan because maybe we play against a deck with a bunch of basics and then we don't really have a great plan when, you know, they're swordsing our Terravores and we aren't going out of their mana, and it can be a little bit ineffective there. So I think it's about finding the balance of how much of the 60 card main deck do we have to put towards the strategy of what we're trying to achieve, and where can we make some slight changes or make room to obviously say, okay, this is Legacy. It's a pretty unfair format. We have to put some cards in the deck that aren't going to be really part of our strategy, but we do want to, you know, stay ahead and, you know, be still in the game on turn 3. So from there, we can kind of see that there's a few packages that I typically see within green-white builds. You have things like the D&T package, I'm just going to call it, which have Thalia, a Stoneforge package. You might have then another way to win the game through Kaldra, or you might have some pseudo removal through some swords or Jide effects. You have combo hate like Vexing Bauble and Endurance, where you just want to make sure that you're not dying on turn 1, or that, you know, you are putting up a fight against a lot of the combo decks, or decks like Blue-Black Scam, which are currently in the format. Emphasis on currently. Zenith Bullets is another way to go about it and say, hey, I want to have more creatures, but the D&T package I can't really search for with Green Sun Zenith, so I'm just going to go all in on the Green Sun Zenith sort of side of the deck, and potentially even work in that land destruction package and play things like Titania Protector of Growth, which Protector of Argoth, sorry, which is just another win con, especially with Sylvan Safekeeper, which is kind of another cool way to win out of nowhere because Safekeeper plays pretty well with Terravore. It not only protects Terravore, but whenever you use Safekeeper, you're also giving Terravore +1/+1. So potentially a little bit like sacking all your lands to another Reliquary with a Safekeeper in play, you could sack all your lands to make a giant Terravore and win in one swing. Safekeeper is nice to make sure that the threats you're putting on the board are also sticking around. You then also have sort of the more lands or loam style versions of where you could fill these spots. And that's done typically by Sylvan Library, Life in the Loam, Mox Diamond. Probably more so Life in the Loam, Mox Diamond. Library a little bit on the edge of play with the printing of Orcish Bowmasters. And honestly, just the kind of speed of the format at the moment. So what I like to do is find a bit of a middle ground. So I really like adding extra creatures, and I think building into Green Sun Zenith is fantastic because the more creatures you add that do different things to the deck that can be tutored with Green Suns is just going to power the Green Suns even more. So by adding the Scavenging Ooze, you're now saying that Green Suns for 2 is going to be Graveyard Hate. Green Suns for 2 for Collector Ouphe is now Artifact and Enchantment Hate. So every creature with kind of a unique distinguishment makes it really nice to power out and make Green Suns really flexible. The Reclaimers, I think, are also a really nice card to build around and pretty cheap as well when it comes to slots in the deck. You're already going to be a Terravore deck with Reclaimer, so you do want to have a pretty high count of lands. And I think having targets like Bojuka Bog and the newly printed Talon Gates of Madara is exactly where you want to go in terms of like direction with the deck, because they're just fantastic cards. They're really well positioned. Talon can of course be a protection spell for your creatures, which is great. Bojuka Bog just really nice in a slower version of Legacy. You're not seeing like the all-in reanimator decks as much these days, or things like Ouphe spells. So I think having the potential turn 2 Bojuka Bog through a Reclaimer is more than fine. And then I think with that, you kind of build towards a bit of a Ramunap package where you can play the Loams, but being able to Green Suns for Loam and, you know, add in 1 copy of Ramunap and get virtually 5 copies thanks to Green Suns is really appealing. So I think having a mix of both Loam and Ramunap is really nice. So I think you also have to think about, and this is probably a big part, what do you need to respect and what do you need to beat? So obviously Re-Scaminator, top of the list, probably the deck that is on everyone's mind when it comes to being at the top of Legacy and what you need to beat. We see sort of the Grixis Tempo, Delver / Delverless decks there. Lands, sort of 4-color control, Minarid Prison, Painter, Cephalid, Ouphe, Stiflenaut, Depths. Kind of the typical decks you would think of. And I think it's really important just to sit down, get out some pen and paper, and put together a pretty easy, what cards do you think you're going to be taking out against these matchups in the main deck? Count them all up, get your numbers, and then realize how many cards you probably need to side in to have a pre or a post board 60 with cards that are all super or semi-relevant to the matchup. And I think from there you can work out a pretty nice sideboard based on the cards you need to bring in, where you can overlap, where you can have some flexibility in the cards you play for. And yeah, I think just make sure that you're not just trying a deck to see how far it goes based on its own strategy, but also how can it adapt to either stall your opponent or beat your opponent's strategy at the same time. That's actually it. I next have the deck tech with where I've kind of come from. So I'll see you in that. All right, here is the first 60 and 15 that I will show soon of green-white Terravore. So here we have pretty much the skeleton built out to just work towards what we want to achieve with the deck. So obviously we still have the 3/3 Terravore and white Orchid, the 4 Reclaimer, a Loam, a Ramunap, the 4 green suns to go and find what we're looking for. And then a good mix of land that I think are all pretty relevant. So we have the Bojuka Bog, we have an Echoing Deeps to copy, things like Bog, things like Maze, Talons potentially. I do like having a Boseiju in this list, especially with the Loam. I think that's really nice. We have things like Canopy and Wasteland for the Ramunap and somewhat the Loam. We have a Stage and a Depths as well, because I do think it's somewhat relevant to have a kind of I win button in the list as a way to just make sure we are not prolonging the game for the sake of it. And I think that Stage and Depths just fit really well into the list. So hopefully that is okay with Joe. But yeah, I do like that we are keeping like at least 3 copies of each of these to see how they perform. One thing I did find was post board, your opponent might go for basics early on, which makes the white Orchid a little bit tough. It's also a little bit tough if you're wastelanding them off a color and then you want to play the white Orchid, but remember they have a basic of that color in their mana base, which can be a little bit daunting. So I took my scam opponent off actually multiple times. We wastelanded our scam opponents and then had the white Orchid, but didn't really want them to be able to fetch up their basic island, which was tough. I don't know if potentially it's just you just play into that, or if it's a case where you should have something like an Aven Mind Sensor or some sort of search package alongside, but I still like the white Orchid. There's been a few matchups so far, especially a 4-color build we played that didn't actually play any basics, so the white Orchid was really good. I also really like the Ghost Quarter. The Ghost Quarter was great in a Doomsday matchup where they didn't really think about how aggressively we could go after their mana post Doomsday, and we were able to white Orchid their dual land and then Ghost Quarter the basic in play, which took them off 2 sources of blue, which is obviously pretty detrimental. But I think this deck is pretty cool. It is really tough because it's really tough to say, hey, why isn't this better than, why don't you just play green white Depths? Why aren't you just playing, the more, the deck with all the results, the deck that players are playing? And I think it's really cool to just always innovate, especially with Legacy. And obviously it's pretty close, this list, but I think the Terravore and white Orchid somewhat just line up really well. I did want to fit in Thalia at some stage, but it was just a little bit too tricky. You kind of have to fit in probably more than 2 if you want to see it. And that was just really hard. I really like having Once Upon a Time in this sort of list. So I went ahead with the 3 onces instead of saying, let's just find some room for 3 Thalias. The original list also had Mana Dorks. And although I do like Dryad Arbor with Green Suns, which I think just pair really well, I did put Mox Diamond in this list because I think it just has a little bit more a little bit more synergy with both Loam and Terravore and somewhat Reclaimer. I haven't really seen Prismatic ending around that much, so I find that Mox Diamond typically lands and is just in play a lot longer than an actual mana dork. And Mox Diamond just helping out a little bit with colors as well is pretty good, which isn't too bad in this list. Like, I think a Noble Hierarch would pretty much cover all of them anyway, but there's some really weird situations where, like, the Mox Diamond paying for the extra off a Dismember and saving 2 life can be relevant. Sometimes you're able to actually cast a Fairy Macabre as a flyer or a threat, but I think that Mox just fits really well. And it's a big reason why I fit in the library. Just another really good turn 1 play with the Mox Diamond. And library is a great way to make sure you're not drawing into the additional Mox Diamonds when they're not needed. I didn't want to fit in Saga. Saga was the card that I kind of felt like I was moving towards, but I would be playing at least 2 Sagas. I'll probably have at least 2 targets in probably like a main deck Vexing Bauble and a Lava Spur Boot, so I didn't include that. I really wanted to try to keep this build as Terravore based as much. So like, we have the Terravores, we have the Endurances to obviously not just die to scam or some sort of graveyard hate, but we also have Endurance to Endurance ourselves if we really need to get a land back into the list, or maybe a Green Sun's target. Ramunap obviously just works really well in land-based strategies. Library, I think you can be pretty aggressive with. The Loams just allow you to fuel your Terravores. I did play around with Sevinne's Reclamation, but I think just at the end of the day, I just wanted another threat. I didn't want to have to rely on there being something in the graveyard that was relevant at the time for Sevinne's to be online, because I don't think green-white typically has that luxury. But I think everything else here is pretty much there. I would say that like the Endurances, the Collector Ouphe, and probably the Echoing Deeps are my way of respecting the current format. In having something for some of the combo decks, having a backup Bojuka Bog is pretty huge, and then also the Endurances as more graveyard hate. So otherwise, I think the deck is kind of built in a way that we are looking to just win through Terravore and disrupt through White Orchid. So hopefully this list goes through with that plan. When we look at the sideboard, I'm kind of working in 3s. So we have 3 Vexing Bauble. I really like Bauble. I think Bauble's pretty fantastic, especially as a way to turn off Days and Force. Obviously Grief, Lotus Petal Lily, there's a lot of things Vexing Bauble does turn off. One awkward thing if you do play Thalia is that if you play Thalia but have Vexing Bauble in play, your opponent can now pay the one-off Thalia to make their free spells, not really worry about Vexing Bauble, which is tough. So, simple example, I have Vexing Bauble and Thalia in play. Your opponent casts a Lotus Petal, pays the tax for Thalia, and of course it's now had mana spent for it, so it doesn't get counted. Fairy Macabre, I think I like, is just a really easy answer to reanimate Life and Loam, any sort of Guy's Wills decks. I do like that it can be found off Once Upon a Time as well. And yeah, it can't be countered, which is pretty huge. And I really like that. I don't want to run Path to Exile. And this is a tough one because Path has a lot of play to it, because if you're a deck that's wastelanding your opponent in game 1, then in game 2, they might go for their basics early on to just build out their mana and know that they're not going to get wastelanded, which makes Path actually pretty good, because if they've gone for their 1 or 2 basics and they have none left, Path is essentially just a better source to Plowshares. I get that. However, if you're wastelanding your opponent and then they get down a threat that is really hard to answer and you have to path it and you just give them back the mana that you've been trying to keep them off, that could be really tough. And I would say that comes up a lot more than the path being better than swords situation. And I think that's how you should probably look at cards like that. You should look at path and go, okay, worst case, I'm going to do all this work at taking my opponent off mana, but then not only give them the mana they need, give them an unwastelandable source to kind of work off and go from there. Path has some small upsides of sometimes being able to, say, path your own creature in response to removal if you really want the mana. But typically that doesn't come up as much as you need it to. Path also has just, it deals with non-dismemberable targets. So things like a 7/7 Atraxa, a big Archon, Grizzlebrand, of course. There are a few things that it does hit. There are times where you go for a basic island, a basic forest early on, or you have a non-plains in the deck and you get Mages of the Moon. Then I do like having Dismember there because it can just hit Mages of the Moon, which can be a little bit of an issue with the deck. We do have the Mox Diamonds, the plains and the forest, and also a pseudo win con with Depths and Magus, but I just think that Dismember is fine. So we'll try out the Dismember, and then the flexibility of Get Lost. I kind of like being able to destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Veil of Summer I think is decent right now, especially against Scam. I really like it. And it's also nice just to know that you have, against some of the blue decks, a bit of uncounterability to your spells. Veil can be really nice. Choke I think works really well in this deck because you're obviously a mana denial deck. It can be a little bit awkward at times, especially if you're on the play against Delver. I typically like bringing in Choke, but then having the Wastelands there early on, I guess Delver's a bad example because typically if you're wastelanding them anyway, like other than say a Taiga out of Rug or something weird like that, you're wastelanding sources that are going to get hit by Choke. But say like a 4-color deck, they might go for a non-blue Triome and then have a Savannah, which you probably want to wasteland. But if they go for islands, then it can be a little bit awkward knowing you have Choke coming out and you want to save your wastelands for those non-island jewels in a perfect world. But overall, I think Choke is great. And then Force of Vigor, just being a free way to interact, I think is fantastic, and I think is pretty much a staple for nearly any green deck. Force is just phenomenal at what it does. So, yeah, I think in closing, this deck is trying to go after opponent's mana, land some big threats, and beat down before your opponent recovers. So hopefully, in the league ahead, we get to do that. Also, let me know what you think of this sort of format. I would love to know your feedback. Maybe I missed something. Maybe you wish I dived into something else a little bit more. But yeah, I do like doing this kind of like presentation style deck techs for especially my patrons. And I think should be kind of the future, because I think that I think that like Magic Online content could do a whole lot better across the board. And any ways to maybe see improvements where not only I can improve, but people could watch and go, hey, I should be doing that on my stream or my YouTube content. I think that'd be really cool. So let me know. We'll see you in round 1. All right, round 1. We have a pretty nice start. We have a turn 1 Reclaimer through Mox Diamond. We have Flagstones with Reclaimer, which is pretty nice as well. We could turn 1 Awkward if we really wanted to as well. So a lot of options here. So pretty happy to keep this. Thoughtseize isn't too bad. Our hand is very similar, although potentially the Reclaimer I could see going here, as taking a Mox leaves us with 1 more, and the White Corker does replace itself, so we'll see if potentially taking them off 2 colors and giving them just back 1 is something they actually worry about. And they do, which is pretty nice for us. So here we have the ability to play double Reclaimer on turn 1. The question is how much value do we put behind the Flagstones? Because we could go fetch land, pitch, which would make both Reclaimers 3/4s. Pretty interesting. I think I do like the Flagstones because it allows us to start using the Reclaimer in a really positive manner in terms of how we go about it. So let's go Flagstones first, play around days, play the Mox, pitch, play 1 Reclaimer, play the Mox, pitch, and then we have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is a turn 1, no cards left in hand. Getting both Reclaimers down this turn means that if they have one removal spell like Fatal Push or Dismember, then at least we can start, you know, going along the lines with the second one. Swords I did not see coming. So it's going to be like an Esper style deck, which is very interesting. Okay. So here we have to make a choice. Do we want a white Orchid or do we want to keep up Reclaimer? They are a Thoughtseize deck. I don't mind getting the... Now this is an interesting one. I actually like holding up Reclaimer here because their next turn will have 4 mana, 2 for Reclaimer and 2 for Phantom. Step Brainstorm is pretty expected. But these two lands together I haven't seen in a long time. One thing to note is that with White Orchid, you can also target your own Flagstones to ramp because you will get the Land of Flagstones and then also the Land of the Search. So there is some play with White Orchid where you actually want to target your own lands. This was also a small consideration in my head that if we White Orchid with them with blue open, they can Brainstorm and then kind of get the free shuffle of the White Orchid, which is obviously quite good for them, disrupting the mana in a way that isn't too efficient right now. But I think if they go for another dual land next turn, we'll go for Reclaimer into Savannah, Wasteland, untap, Wasteland 1, White Orchid the other. There's been a lot of games where Elvish Reclaimer has just won the game on its own. It didn't really need a whole lot else. The nice thing as well is that our opponent probably thinks there's something like Sejiri Step in the deck, so they might wait to deal with the Reclaimer at instant speed in response to the tap. I wonder if this is a Stone Blade deck, like a Esper Stone Blade. They're the vibes I got when I saw the White Splash. This is also a little bit awkward that if we do go for Wasteland here, take them off the black source and then White Orchid and give them the ability to search for a basic swamp, that can be a little bit tricky. But let's go for Wasteland. Okay. Bog's not the worst if they are a Murktide deck. Let's start with Orchid. I assume they have a basic island, so I'm going to go for the black here. See if they have that swamp. It could be like a 2 island, 1 plains, 1 swamp kind of deck. No. Okay, that's great for us. Hit them again, and then bog them. The bog is also just a 4th mana, meaning if we untap, we can Green Suns for 3, which is quite nice. The chokes post-board are going to be quite nice here. The other cards I like are the Get Lost, just to see what sort of cards they're playing with. Potentially the Veils as well. They chose to not shuffle. Didn't find a black source, but found an island and passed. Okay. And there's exactly the green card that we were looking for in Green Sun, so that's pretty sweet as well. Start by attacking. Now the question is, what do we want to go for? I actually wouldn't mind just going for Ramunap here. Potentially getting back the Canopy. I'm not going to play around Daze. This seems like a bit more of a mid-range deck, but I think that there's just such an upside of getting a Ramunap here and then potentially getting another card with this. Canopy is just a nice 2-for-1 that I kind of need right now. Really need the board to keep building out with threats and hopefully make our opponents stumble on their mana. Okay. Interesting to use the Brazen. Could see it if this is something like Supreme Verdict and you're just wanting to take me off a little bit of mana while also removing the graveyard. Okay. I'm going to start here with drawing a card. Terravore. Play the Wasteland here. Take them off black again. They have one card in hand. So this can become 2/2, next turn a 3/3. Okay. Play the Reclaimer. And then I'm pretty happy to attack with both here, as next turn they could discard both and make it a flyer to get over. And we have the Reclaimer back anyway. Ooh, I guess they could... I didn't think of this becoming a 2/3. Actually, no. I guess they could like exile to fly and then make this a 2/3. But I'm happy with that. I think the way White Orchid's kind of done its role. And I just want to get a damage through here. But Frog's a really good start from them to like kind of get a good grip on this game. A land off the top wouldn't be the worst. Currently have 4 cards in the bin. Stage is quite nice. I feel like that's better than the Mox Diamond. I'm going to play this first. Get in. There is a world like they have 3 cards. This can become a 4/5 that playing the Mox and getting rid of the stage is better. But I kind of like that a land of the top moves us towards just the ability to have a big creature. They also can't really attack too well, which is great. Do we have a line here? We can phase this out, which is nice. So let's start with that. Quick think. I could cast Loam first. But I don't want to make the Terravore smaller. But I could Loam back 2 lands, pitch 1 to Mox, and then play the Flagstones, and then get rid of the Flagstones anyway, which makes this a 4/4 or a 5, which kind of doesn't really change anything. So I think we do that. I think we go Loam back, Flagstones, Wasteland. So we play the Flagstones for turn. We play the Mox. Pitching the Wasteland. And then we sacrifice the Flagstones. Go and get a Savannah. Guess I could have got a Lush as well. Maybe Lush to get the extra land in, but I think we have like lethal anyway. That hopefully it shouldn't matter. Talon hits the Frog. I guess the Brazen Borrower might change things. Okay. That's interesting because they do have the Brazen. Can only block creatures with flanks. So they can cast that, block here, take 4. I don't have a way to put another land into bin, so pretty lucky there. A few awkward moments for me just for, I think, casting things and learning how to kind of play with this version of the deck, especially with Mox and Terravore, but we got there, which is nice. So Frog is the big one. Frog, having answers to Frog is exactly where I want to be. The chokes seem really nice as well. This deck looks to have more than 2 basic islands, so it's obviously a pretty big blue deck. The Veils are also interesting, both against counter magic and also things like Thoughtseize, so I kind of like that. The Ouphe is a pretty easy bear to take out. I don't think that's going to be relevant. I could see the Caracas coming out as well. I don't see too many things aligning there. The Boseiju I don't mind, especially if there's some sort of Stoneblade list. The library is interesting. There could be a Bowmaster deck, but at the same time, it's not doing too much. The Awkwards are a little bit awkward. I don't mind that they do take them off black. It looks like they don't have a swamp to fetch up, but not really where I want to be. The endurances are nice, especially just keeping frogs small and on the ground, I should say. Safekeeper. I kind of see this as like a pretty mid-rangey like play with my creatures, not so much a Dark Depths match, but they are a sort of Plowshares deck, so I don't mind having the Safekeeper. It's just a one-of. They probably have some sort of Graveyard Hate sideboard, so I don't mind going down to like the 1 Terravore and just seeing how this plays out. Having a quick look. I don't think Vexing Wall is going to be worth it. It looks like it's probably just a Force of Will deck. I don't mind having the Mox Diamonds. See how this goes. Honestly, a decent hand. They might be a back to basics deck just off the basics they had, but again, I don't think they are, especially without a swamp. I think that's a pretty key insight to pick up to go, hey, okay, they don't have a basic swamp. They're probably not a back to basics deck, so 3 Savannahs is going to be pretty okay for us. I'm also happy here just to go Savannah, Green Suns for Dryad Arbor, because I think it let us turns on so many things. Even if we want to hold up a turn 2 endurance potentially. But having the swords is good, but if they have a Thoughtseize, it's obviously 1 swords down. So interesting. So they do have a swamp. Another removal spell is actually quite good. No Entomb shenanigans, which is always nice as well. Okay. This is a good reason to keep away from the kind of Terravore strategy post board, because they do have some control over their graveyard with Frog, that they can just make your Terravore 0/0s and kill them pretty efficiently that way. Okay. I think here we want to start moving towards... It could just be passing here for endurance being open. Reclaimer's nice, but I think I'm happy just to see if we want to hold up the endurance. As a good beater that doesn't rely on the graveyard. That's actually great as well, because I think if we went for a Reclaimer or something to the similar degree, they might have kept the Spellbomb around a little bit longer. So this is actually quite nice that we get to go Endurance this turn and then follow up with Reclaimer the following turn without having to worry about the Spellbomb. I did say back to basics, but I'm going to say that's not something to worry about. Going to target their graveyard. Boseiju is actually pretty perfect that we get to go 1-2. I guess I could attack with the Dryad Arbor. Yeah, okay. I could hold it up with the other Savannah to hold up Boseiju, but I'm happy to get the extra damage in and then this turn just Green Suns for a Reclaimer. And then the chances of finding another source to pay for the Boseiju if they do have back to basics is just a little bit too high for me that I think it's okay. Okay. This is where those the white phantoms can be pretty awkward post board as well, so happy we got rid of them. Mox is decent. Play the maze. We have a damage stop on our turn. Get in with both. Bowmasters is fine. Not too unhappy here. I feel like Dryad Arbor is kind of done its role. Look, in the off chance, no, I'm pretty happy to untap here. I was going to say if like one gets equipped with like a Jide or something, we do have swords and dismember anyway. But I like that Maze answers those a threat with Jide without actually, you know, putting a card towards it, which I think is pretty huge in this sort of matchup. I wonder how many Bowmaster they have post board. Still in the basics as well, so playing pretty heavily around Wasteland effects, but also somewhat stifling their mana. Like as you can see here, they couldn't say Ponder again with an Underground Sea or a Tundra. No great attacks either. They chose not to shuffle, which is interesting. Okay. Happy just to go in for attacks. Lush. Choke would be kind of cool to find. Veil isn't too bad. I don't mind it with where this game is, that if they get rid of this one endurance, I really want to have a way to make sure my next threat is hitting the field, and Veil does that. It does obviously take up a draw step, but I think that's probably worth it. Okay. This is fine. question is, do we want to Veil before we Endurance just because of the Teferi in play? I don't think so. If they want to force the Endurance, I'm pretty okay with that. Hit the graveyard again, which is quite nice. Opponent could be thinking about like Murderous Cut potentially. Cling to Dust. Okay. There's really no reason to do anything else this turn, so we're just going to pass. Teferi isn't the worst for me, but it is a nuance, and I don't really want to be spending these spells to remove these small creatures just to kill it. But they are at 6, so there's a world where I want to get towards just shooting them for, you know, over 2 turns. But also turning on the Veil is quite nice if possible. Prismatic Ending. Okay. We do also have a copy of Get Lost, which gets rid of the Teferi quite well. I also meant to Maze there. Apologies. This is pretty interesting. At this stage of the game, I kind of like Green Suns for Ramunap, get back the Dryad Arbor. Just to kind of go a little bit wide on the board. But hopefully it doesn't come back to that 1 damage from the missed Maze of Ith effect. That's fine, as we have the Dismember. They have 2 cards left. All right. Let's start with Dismember. Okay. Now I could Sword kill Teferi. I could also just run both at Teferi. I could also Sword Bowmaster to make sure if they have another Bowmaster, they can't triple block the Ramunap. This also saves. Yeah, okay. Go for Teferi. Just the 1 block, that's fine. And here... Pretty happy to untap. And then pass. No land to put off the bin. Chose to not shuffle. This must have found something pretty good. Okay. Terravore is currently a 0-0. So let's just start with the tax again. Swords is fine. Interesting. Do I play the Mox, get rid of the Boseiju? Just to get the Terravore into play. They did have Cling to Dust before. Would only be a 1-1 as well. I think I'll wait just a brief moment for that. I think if they did attack me there, I wouldn't maze just to keep stuff going through to the Teferi. Ooh, Green Suns. Okay. Now I'm pretty happy to try to get a Safekeeper into play. Okay. Interesting not to say draw step, Thought Sees me. So I can't actually cast anything. Agent's a little bit annoying. So now I'm going to start with Veil and draw a card. Ah, the Bowmaster. I didn't think of that. Hopefully it doesn't come back to bite us. For a second there, I thought I could cast the Terravore, but I can't, of course. I meant to, yeah. That's okay. That was a pretty awkward turn. Okay. That's a start. No great attacks just yet. I'd probably rather just have the Dryad Arbor in play. Yeah. I think here we'll most likely to see a Teferi tick down on the Terravore. Okay, Terravore becomes a 1/1. They're going to try to kill the Terravore here, but it won't work out for them nicely because we have the Boseiju to save it. Unless they have another way to get rid of what they currently have. That's actually pretty good because they didn't lose a... They didn't find a land off that. Okay. Quick check. So there's a Terravore, Endurance, Ramunap, Rallia, etc. I don't have a way to search for a way to put a land in the bin, unfortunately. Let's see what happens here. I actually don't mind Reclaimer. I think Reclaimer does a little bit more for us than it does for our opponent. Happy to see how they block here and then just Maze potentially a creature that gets double blocked. Okay. I let that go because I'm happy to probably build the Reclaimer up here. I am missing like a real threat here, I feel. Like, I kind of miss Knight just because it doesn't die to your opponent just getting rid of all lands in the graveyard. Toxic Deluge. Okay. I could see them sacrificing a land here to give Shroud. Okay. Just trying to see a little bit more of their deck. I don't really want to even play that, so we will concede to that. Okay. So they're pretty aggressive on getting rid of Terravore. But I also want to make sure we have enough threats running around that I could see like an extra one for just a Mox and just see how this plays out. I don't think the White Orchids are where I want to be. Okay. I'm happy to keep this. A little bit awkward because I don't really want to play the Mox Diamond out, but I feel like I semi have to if I want to hold up the Veil turn 1. Could just play Boseiju pass. I actually don't mind that. We're not too scared of back to basics because we saw the creature. We haven't seen a Wasteland yet either. Happy to Wasteland that. And then just pass back. I do want to play the Mox out until I get value off it. Okay. I think I'm happy just to wait one more turn, hold up Veil and Swords here, and then hold up Terravore and Veil next turn. If they play a Frog and then try to protect it with Force, thankfully we have a play around that. Okay. And that's great for a Harbinger. So let's go with Mox first, probably pitching the Bojuka Bog here. Play the stage. A little bit awkward because we don't have 3 green. That I kind of feel like just passing here. And then what we can do is turn the Flagstones into a green source thanks to stage copying it, getting a second version. They bottom a Thoughtseeds, which is pretty interesting. That makes me think that this turn is going to be a tap out. Wow, nothing. Interesting. Okay. Well, now is the time to act. So let's copy the Flagstones. And then we want to keep this copy. And then use this one to search for a third green source. A land is nice. Play Terra. Pass back. Sadly, Veil doesn't save it from Swords, but I think that's okay. Triumph is fine. I'm going to fetch first. I'm just going to swords this. Could have saved the fetch for Lush. Here I'm happy to go after the blue because of cantrips. Could have even copied it with stage before we used it. I think that's probably actually correct to really go after their mana quite hard. Thoughtseize is fine. We can Veil. Draw a Terra, which is pretty sweet. Play the Dryad. Play the Terra. Swords is fine. There's another Wasteland. Now we're rolling. If they do nothing this turn, I'm pretty happy just to copy Dryad Arbor. Speed up that pace, y'all. I kind of want to save the forest for Mox as a just in case. They shuffled. Not the most appealing draws for us, but can't complain too much. Kind of the opposite of our opponent. Wow, no land, go to discard. Really want a true threat next draw. Interesting they get rid of a Deluge, as I feel like land would probably be where they need to be to potentially get out of this, but at least here we have some pretty nice outs to them having some sort of threat on board. Talon's kind of cool because it can save our creatures at instant speed. Happy to keep attacking. Okay. Could save it, but I think in this case I'm okay with the trade. Just going to hold up endurance here. See what they want to do. Frog's fine. No attacks. Let's go with a sword on Frog. Let's go with an endurance. Put all their stuff back. Untap. Nope, cool. Lush will give some info. Put that on top. Now it's a little bit scary because like we did have the time to take our opponent sort of, you know, make use of the time they were scrambling on mana, but We just didn't really draw into a real threat, which is just part of playing non-blue decks. But at least we can save this Reclaimer from some sort of shenanigans. We're both on clock as well. Wow, swords again. Wow, you could actually activate this again, which is kind of cool if you had the mana for it. I didn't realize that, but that's pretty sweet. Would love some sort of sweeper in the deck, I guess. Maze is pretty annoying for them, but not backbreaking. Okay, so that I'm pretty happy to dismember. That's a real threat. Okay. Not the greatest because of the orc. Didn't it be cool if you could return the gates to your hand? That'd be pretty sweet. Happy just to pass with this land. In hand, potentially gets a Thoughtseize out of the hand. Take them off the second black source. Interesting they didn't escape in response to like double cling. Okay. Happy to block probably here just in case we draw green suns. But I think that's going to be it because we have to block here and then we just take everything. Tough. Definitely one of those games where you just kind of, yeah, can hit the wrong side of the deck. But hopefully we come back in game 2. All right, hey team, back for round 2 with a pretty sweet hand. Happy to keep this. Have access to a few things. Obviously, mana is great. The Windswept Heath could be Dryad Arbor or Lush Portico. Could also be basic forest if we need that. But having removal, an easy turn 1 play, and then green suns to find what we might need down the line, lines up really well. Okay. This is actually an interesting situation where I kind of like just going Windswept into Dryad Arbor to try to get this Reclaimer as a 3/4 as soon as possible. We're going to do that off a basic, which allows us just to have some control over the early game as well, because worst case is Bolt and also Wasteland. So this I'm actually pretty happy about. If we could draw a fetch at the top, that'd be fantastic. Because I think we do have some time to turn the Reclaim into a 3/4, and then it's much harder to deal with, if not really only on the stack, by typical versions of this. Flagstones is pretty sweet. They Wasteland at the Dryad Arbor. I think for now I'm happy to play the Reclaimer. Just because if there's a way to keep this DRC on the table and potentially save the swords for a Murktide, I'd be pretty happy with that. But no. Also happy just not to run into days with this swords. Still the 1 land though, so that's quite nice for us. Play the Savannah and pass. But now the only land we really want off the top is probably our own Wasteland. I don't mind playing into days. I think it's just a case of endurance just takes Murktide off the field, that if they want a daze, they can daze, but I think just 3 here for endurance allows us to get a lot more on the field. Okay. So they have land, instant, sorcery. Yikes. Psychic Frog, interesting. Maybe just not patient enough. Maybe I should have, like, maybe there's a world where there's not enough on the field that, you know, I can just play around days a little bit. And now they might just go a little bit too wide. Like even Wasteland for us, like I kind of like taking them off mana here, but obviously taking them off Wasteland turns on stage, but is that going to be too far away? I think again, sadly, just a little bit too land heavy. I didn't mean to 6 there, but I should have played that. Tough. Some pretty easy cuts in things like Library and Loam. On the play, I don't mind the chokes. I don't mind the baubles, the dismembers, and the get losts. Caracas is a pretty easy cut. Boseiju I don't mind having in the deck. The white Augurs are also quite strong in this matchup, so I'm happy to keep those. Safekeeper I'm pretty happy to cut. Probably one Terravore. And then I do like the Mox Diamonds, even though we're bringing in the baubles. I could see the Dark Depths package going. They usually build towards it with things like bounce spells, which are pretty tough to play around. It might just be one Mox. Happy to keep this. Start off with once into hopefully Reclaimer into Bauble. We'll take the Terravore. All right. Not too unhappy to see the 2-for-1 there. Especially pitching a threat. Happy just to play into Days again and just keep jamming because we have so many spells. They probably have a island. Okay. Frog is fine. I like the idea of Maze on Frog. Potentially getting a Wasteland out of our opponent. And if so, then it just keeps that Terravore growing. There is a world where I wanted to have the Vexing Baubles in the main deck. Maybe that's where I should be aligning. Trying to just make sure we win that sort of unfair game of Legacy in the first game and not just kind of play a little bit too fair. There's the Wasteland. Got a pretty free attack here. So am I getting this away? And then probably just getting the Reclaimer in play. This could have been a Wasteland turn as well. Trying to move towards that That 3/4 Reclaimer. Interesting. No great attacks. And yeah, sadly, really needing to have some sort of like turn 1 or opening hand removal spell, and just not having it is pretty rough. Some sort of sweeper as well. Maybe Wrath. Maybe Wrath is where I want to be. I just don't see us coming back from this. It's a little bit too hard. Like no removal coming up. Sadly, probably just a thought of probably not just keeping a hand because it does something, but keeping a hand with removal against Delver because you know what it's obviously going to achieve. So I think just a really poor game from me. So I apologize for that. Hey team, we're in the 0-2 bracket. So expect anything and everything. I'm pretty happy to keep a hand that just plays on Reclaimer. A little bit sad to have the Bojuka Bog just here, but it looks like we're going to be up against most likely Painter with this start, which will be pretty interesting. I think Painter's got a pretty good matchup against us. A lot of interaction, a lot of good card advantage as well. But we'll see how it all plays out. Mana a little bit awkward here with the White Orchid. We're not casting this until probably turn 4. I don't see us getting there if we play the Boseiju as a green source to get double Reclaimer online, so I think we just have to hold up the Boseiju. And then also hope we get their Painter off the field. A little bit slow. Really want to make sure we have probably Mox Diamond against this sort of start. Obviously, removal as well is pretty key. But again, like we can make we can make some game actions this game, but I don't think they're going to matter too much. Do we have Collector Ouphe in the main deck? Okay, that might be a start. But obviously with the Painter in play, that's a little bit tough as well, with things like Reb. I think it might be best just to play the Boseiju here and play the Reclaimer. Oh, we can't, of course. It's just highlighted because you could potentially. Interesting, they just discard the 1. But you can see as well, this is a great board state of like where Ouphe just isn't as great as it once was, and where a lot of decks just have alternate game plans, even if that is just beat down, it can be pretty tough. This might just be like a Phyrexian Dreadnought, Phyrexian, the draw 3, Chaos Defiler as well. Yeah. All right. We like the forces. I don't think the baubles do anything. Dismembers and Get Lost are pretty sweet. I could see Caracas coming out. The Ouphe is fine. The White Orchids I don't mind, especially if they're on Saga. Library's nice, as I just want to get ahead of them as well on cards. Depths I think is fine. Ghost Quarter I can see coming out. I think the Wastelands are more than enough. Could just be Safekeeper. Like, I think post-board protecting something like an Ouphe isn't all that relevant with how many other things they could be doing. I could see a Mox coming out, just be a little bit quicker. I don't think Veil's worth it either, because they could name anything with Painter. They obviously most likely name Blue, but I don't think Veil is that great. Vexing Bauble hits Lotus Petal. Potentially Fury. Maybe. Nah. I think it's a little bit too narrow. This really relies on the once, which I'm not happy with, so we'll mulligan this. Okay, we can keep this, bottom this of... We might even just bottom the Mox here. Keep all the lands we have. And then just go... Probably Savannah Pass. Okay. I don't want to do anything just yet. Pretty happy to hold off. Saga's fine as we have the Wasteland. This feels like a Fable. Okay. Happy to try to go after their mana pretty aggressively. I'm just going to play into Blood Moon as well, because I don't think it's a little bit hard to play, not play into Blood Moon and also have the White Orchid. Now I'm also happy to go Wasteland into Reclaimer, as it will be a 3/4. And then next time we have Hold Up Reclaimer, Dismember, White Orchid, Dismember. Did they just try to bolt my... Alright, we are in the O2 bracket, so as I said, expect everything. Probably could have held up the Reclaimer there, to be fair. Yeah, I think it was a lot better. I think I've just a little bit off this league, let's be honest. I don't think I need to deal with this just yet. It chose white. Interesting. Wow. Okay. I assume they wanted to choose, obviously, blue there and just misclicked. We're just going to run this back, honestly. I don't think there's any real changes necessary. Yeah. Pretty aggressive. I don't mind it. Obviously, the double wastelands are nice. If this was a non-tap source, I'd be a lot happier, like a fetch land, but on the draw, I'm happy to keep it. It has removal, it has some interaction. All right. Happy to put that on top. Another colored source is pretty sweet. Magus is fine. But they're especially like having the tap source for the swords on the Magus could just be backbreaking. That could be the whole game. And that is definitely a big reason why sometimes it isn't great to, you know, it seems good that there's a one-off, but there's always going to be these situations as well. So we actually have a pretty cool thing here over the next 2 turns. We can get a plains, keep the Magus in play, but then also fetch up a Dark Depths, have it come in with 0 counters, and then swords the Magus. So we'll see how that plays out. Okay. It's pretty good. It changes our line as well. I think even there, I should have got rid of the other Wasteland so that when I swords the Magus, I have another white source for this exact moment. Tricky. Interesting. Okay. Pretty happy to block here. And then I will Swords the Fury this turn, giving us another turn to draw into even Reclaimer. Or of course Dark Depths. Or do we even take it out? Maybe we actually just took it out. No, we didn't. Okay, good. I think we're just a little bit too far behind. I don't think we have a great out. Like the value is just really hard to keep up with, but the Lush really got us there. So obviously not the start we want, but we'll see how we can finish up. All right, team, welcome back. We are on the play. Pretty happy to keep this. We could go all in on a turn 1 Reclaimer to be a 3/4, which is pretty interesting. I don't mind, like if they are a Bolt deck, we have a backup in Green Sun, so I honestly think here I kind of just want to go. I mean, it could be Mox pitch, play a land, play the Reclaimer, and then have it as a 3/4 with a draw. I don't mind that. Let's just go with that. Mox pitch, play Reclaimer, land for turn, cast Mox, pitch this, go. Will they try to bolt the bird? Surely not. But again, things happen in O3 brackets. Ponder. Okay. I'm pretty happy just to get rid of this canopy here. Worst case is we untap, draw 2 cards, and don't draw a land, which would be a pretty big setback, but I feel like this deck has shown today how many lands it has, that we will be okay with that situation. Currently lagging a little bit, sorry. All right. Nice. Okay. Play the Bog. And then pass here with Reclaimer open. Which we do have Echoing Deeps to use the bog again if they try to say Grief Reanimate, which is nice. Tomb. Okay. I feel like this is the moment where Echoing Deeps just shows its power. Well, that's cool, especially to just like no longer worry about the Archon as well. Another Reclaim is actually quite nice. Means we have 2 threats plus also hold up Reclaimer here. And then luckily here we also just have get Flagstones, which plays around the Wasteland. All right. Ooh. Fun, but I think here again we're just going to pass with the Reclaimers open. And also swords. Interesting. I'm okay with this. Does kind of show that we don't have Sejiri Step in the deck, but I think that's okay. Grief is fine. We'll start with swords. What'll they take? Reclaimer. Okay. Well, happy to turn this Flagstones probably just into a Plains. And then go and get the other Flagstones. Could also go for Depths, but we need 1 more mana off the top for that to work 100%, so... I like Flagstones, because it means if we draw a land, we just have Terravore and also hold up Reclaimer. Yep. And I will just fetch now so they can't respond to the fetch by me doing something. Now this is actually pretty interesting. This turn, I might actually use the Green Suns. Ooh, doesn't play around days. I could get Safekeeper here. I think I'm actually happy just holding up the Reclaimer as a just in case. A little bit scary. That's unfortunate. Yeah. I guess we have Caracas, but it comes in tapped. We do have the Talons as well, which is pretty interesting. Go for Wasteland. Sadly, not too much to do. But thankfully, we do have Talons here to help us out a little bit. Probably just a cycle troll. No. Alright, go to combat. Swing. Wasteland, Wasteland. Get rid of this. Get Talons this turn. Voidwalker's annoying, but not too bad. Wow, because Terravore just gets there. That is actually insane. Did not expect that to happen. All right, we kind of like all of, like, we kind of like everything, right? Like, I like the Vexing Baubles for grief, for force, for days. Like the McCabe's for the Entombs package, like chokes. Maybe not the chokes on the draw. Ouphe can come out. I don't mind the Loams. It's actually a tricky one. Maybe not the baubles on the draw either. Like maybe not the veils on the draw either. White Orchids, I feel like they have enough basics, unfortunately. Terravore, I could see trimming. Just because they have pretty good control post board with graveyards. Safekeeper's an interesting one. Like in that game it was quite good, but otherwise I don't think it's that great. It's not really the deck that I want to be throwing lands away for. I think it's just going to be a Mox on the draw. Terra coming in clutch. The only thought there was potentially building out. It's a pretty easy mulligan. Building out my mana, using my mana in response to Voidwalker to make the Terravore like a 13/13, just to make sure it's lethal. Mana here is really odd. That's a yikes. Yeah, we have to go to 5, unfortunately. Ugh. I mean, it has the Dismember, so it might just be something like this. But definitely not great. Okay. Playing this into Wasteland because I just want to make sure we're hitting lands off the top. Is that better than anything? I think we're just putting that in the graveyard, honestly. We really want to find a green source. Well, they didn't Wasteland us. Okay. Maybe that's just because they have like the Entomb Exhume. No. Okay. Interesting. This is fine, thanks because of the Dismember. Pay. Happy to play the Plains and then probably just pass here. Hmm. I'll try to dismember this. Not going after the Lush turn one was really interesting, especially with nothing else to do. Like, maybe they thought that Harbinger was the answer to the Lush, so they were just going to get to that, but that can really tunnel vision you. And I've been in that position where it's like, well, I don't want to Wasteland an early Trop or a Tundra because I have the choke in hand, but a lot of the time it's, you know, play what's in front of you. They pitched to Dismember. Let's go land. And then probably just hold up Get Lost this turn. Guess we also have the Endurance. So let's get back these two. Nice. Now if they try to do anything with the yard, we can just Endurance pitch once. I think just this league I've played pretty poorly. I think I have just a bit of an issue with rushing into things and then talking about them. And even though I'm coming to the realization for months that I do this, I still do it where I make a play, I then talk through it and then realize there was another play that just would have been better. Let's try to Endurance. Endurance them. Nice. All right, fetch on top. All right, put on top, put on top. What are we going to do this turn? Probably Green Suns. If we play the stage, We then kind of have that open over 2 turns, which is nice. Because next turn we'll have stage and 4 mana, which is 2 for Reclaimer and 2 for Dark Depths. Dismember. Okay. What if they're going to try to reanimate this turn? Okay. They have 1 card left. Swords is pretty good. Macabre is pretty good. Wasteland's pretty good. Put on top. Pay for this. Take them off a C. And then pass. We have swords open here. We have stage, copy a basic if we want, which I don't mind. Probably actually just want to hit the Savannah. It gives us access to a little bit more. No Loam. Guess we could Loam if we wanted to. Maybe I will actually. Nice. Put on top. Ah, I can't pay for that. Hopefully it doesn't come back to bite us. Okay. They still have 2 cards. All right. So 1 fairy's gone to the bin, unfortunately, but we do have that endurance, I believe. There it is, okay. No, no. Okay. Put on top. Put on top. Land pass. We have 1 card left, and thankfully we have the endurance. So now we have a real threat, which is nice. Look, we got there. We got there against Scaminator, which I did not expect. We're on the board. Let's try to finish this off as a 2-3. All right, team. We have a pretty sweet hand. Happy to keep this. Turn 1, play Flagstones. We have Mox into Reclaimer, and then go from there. Probably just pitching Ghost Quarter here, I think. And see how this Green Suns goes. Brainstorm. Okay. Potentially a Daze deck. Potentially a deck just looking for, do I have a Swords over the next 2 turns? Or do I need to force this? And it's going to be Force. All right. Ooh, Cephalid. Okay. Most likely then a Nadu deck. Gonna go after the Cephalid. Play stage and then pass with swords open. Probably attacking in for one and then playing a post-board Nadu, or maybe just going for Saga. Okay. Happy to play Terravore. Hold up sword. Nadu. Nice. Alright, so we get to respond here, and swords, they get to draw a card, of course. And then kind of we just hope that there's no more Nadus coming. I think here we just have to pass, holding up stage copy Saga potentially. But not a great way for us to keep Nadu off the board. Just a little bit tricky. It's pretty nice. Keeps this off the board. Does give them another construct, but that's okay for now. I think rather having two cards in hand here is better for us, as just unknowns and telling our opponent, you know, we obviously have nothing in hand. And it doesn't mean too much for us either. But this is scary, like any sort of Green Suns, any sort of Nadu is just going to be game. And thankfully swords means Dread Return does not hit Nadu. Okay. Can block here, but then we're taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think it was passing with making a token rather than anything else. Yeah. Chokes, I don't mind. Force of Vigors, I don't mind. And the extra removal. Terravore, I don't mind. Collector Ouphe is interesting because it does somewhat stop the combo, but I don't think that's a great way to stop it that it's worth having. Bog, I think we can take out here. Although they are kind of on the combo with Dread Return, so maybe I will keep it. It could be our Moxen, but I feel like that's our way to get ahead. Safekeeper, I think we can take out here. There's not really something that we want to protect too much. Endurances are fine. It could just be somewhat of a trim. Probably Ghost Quarter. No early interaction is really tough here. Like no actual removal, I think is why I want to mulligan this. Okay. We have the Swords and the Dismember, which is nice. So probably keep and then bottom the Canopy. Just because the Boseiju is kind of a spell. But also tough because if they take out this one threat we have with like a Swords, we don't have a whole lot going on. Okay, we can start again. Land is pretty nice. I think in this case, I'm happy just to play the Boseiju. This way we hold up Dark Depths the following turn. Pretty happy here to turn the Boseiju into a... Probably just into a Flagstones. I do want to keep as much off the board as possible. Okay. I'm pretty happy just to try to go for it here. Okay. We also have Bojuka Bog semi-open, so... I'm having a think. Because if they go, I think they have to go for it to stop us from going for it. Not too sure why. Let's go for Talon here and actually save the Reclaimer. Now we get to hold up the Reclaimer, but also hold up Dark Depths, which is kind of cool. Echoing Deeps, copy Talons, Talons Nadu. All right, we need a removal spell. I don't believe we have one off the Reclaimer here. Ooh. This is actually pretty cool because I believe what we can do is hold priority when we search. I think it's control. So get rid of this, holding priority, cast this, pitch this. Endurance us. Damn. Close though. Tough. That would have been sweet. Well, let's go back to the deck tech. All right. Definitely not the finish we wanted, but probably not too surprising. For a 2024 metagame, green-white, without, really dedicating towards something like Dark Depths or a kind of I-Win button, is going to be pretty rough to run through a Legacy League. And we saw that here first. I will preface by saying that was a pretty poor showing by me. I think I could have taken a lot of spots there where just a little bit of patience or thinking about the cards that I wanted to play around might have worked out two different results, but yeah, it's what you get. Terravore was yeah, I would say not up to the standard that I thought it might be. There was actually a lot of the times where I was thinking, when would Terravore or when would Goyf just be better than Terravore? As a 2-mana spell that is a little bit harder to kill just by state-based actions and, taking out graveyards. I think that, honestly, Goif would have probably performed a lot better. If we did want a 3-drop, it's really hard to say, like, when would we have wanted Terravore overnight of the Reliquary? Potentially that game against Atraxa, they wouldn't have taken out, we wouldn't have taken out the Atraxa, or had like the real... what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say we had a 12-12 Terravore and we wouldn't have had a 12-12 Knight. But the Knight would have given us access to instant speed lands like Caracas, which would have been pretty promising. So there is that as well. I just find it really difficult sometimes to take a list that is very similar to a deck that's already doing really well as such Green-White Depths, and you can kind of see where there's a lot of the elements of Green-White Depths in this list, because I do think that Terravore worked really well with that sort of build. But yeah, maybe it was a case of building more into like the Armageddon style of the deck. I'm not too sure if like a Stoneforge or like a third kind of strategy for the deck is where you want to be. I think you really just want to go all in on Terravore if you want to make it where you want it. Potentially like, you know, Mother of Runes, maybe that should be in here as just another way to protect your creatures, or be a kind of like a bolt or swords target early on, so that once your Terravore comes down, it's a lot better. The mana base wasn't too bad. I think at times there's those classic draws where it's going to happen. We're playing 28 lands. You're going to draw into a lot of lands, and this deck only has 16 creatures. So, you know, nearly for every one creature, there's 2 lands. If you count the Mox Diamonds as mana sources, there actually are. So that is going to happen, and you need to have a bit of a plan around that. And I think that's where Loam and Library do help. But yeah, I think we just found that it just didn't really line up how I thought it would in the games, in the individual games. You obviously just don't have too much control over what you draw, and yeah, it can be tough. Like if you hit your opponent's mana early but then don't have a threat, ultimately they're going to draw into lands, they're going to draw into mana sources, so you really need to make sure you're closing out those early turns, or taxing them in some way. So that was, yeah, a little bit frustrating, but that's just part of Magic, and that's what makes it great. Probably the sideboarding is where I'd like to change things up. Like Choke's great, but we didn't see Choke. You can't tutor for it. If you don't have it in your opening hand, you're not too sure when it's going to come, which can be a little bit tough on knowing how aggressive you want to be with your mana denial. The Veils as well were fine. There was a cool, you know, play against Grief, but that didn't work out. So yeah, that was a little bit tricky. The Baubles, I think, were good. I think Baubles should just be main deck over the Mox Diamonds, and it should probably move towards maybe a Noble Hierarch build. But then again, you're moving away from the Terravore build, so that's kind of tough, because I think Mox Diamond and Terravore just go hand in hand, a little bit like pre-modern. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I feel like the deck isn't too overcomplicated in the main deck. It's not like we're trying to do too many things. It's quite, you know, the strategy is there to just kind of build around Terravore and Reclaimer, build out your mana, have some utility lands when needed, but ultimately try to build up a huge Terravore, and then get in with that with Safekeeper as some sort of protection. Ramunap, of course, gets some extra value. Library and Loam in the same section, but yeah, you know, maybe if anything, it's the Dark Depths and Stage. Maybe Steps and Stage and Depths shouldn't be in the list, and it should be more about the actual creatures you have, and not the Stage and Depths when you don't have things like Crop Rotation or Knight of the Reliquary. You just have the Reclaimers to find them alongside the Loam and the Onces. Yeah, removal as well was a big thing. Like maybe Grist in the deck with a bit of a black source would be nice, as having a extra removal threat through Green Suns, and also just a threat that doesn't really rely on the graveyard. If you play against something like a Nihil Spellbomb or an unlicensed Hearse, or even a Leyline of the Void, this deck is actually pretty poor. The Terravore's dead. The Endurance is a 3/4 with Flash Reach. The Ramunap is a 2/3. The Reclaim is a 1/1 that crop rotates. That's probably a little bit of a weak spot to the deck, is just that even the slightest bit of graveyard hate, it's very hard to rebuild from there sometimes. And that could be something to look into. But yeah, I think what I really learned from this league is a bit of patience. maybe go all in even more with Terravore and don't try to make it about, hey, this is a green-white shell that's very much like Depths, but we're playing Terravore. Because that's kind of what it looks like right here. As I look at it, like the White Orchid Phantom, the Terravore's a little bit different, but everything else is pretty much what you look at when you look at a green-white Depths build. And I think that's just a tricky part for me to get out of my head, especially being like probably more of a competitive player than a casual player, is that when I see a deck, I look straight at, well, why don't we just build X? Or, you know, how is this better than green-white Depths? And it can be a little bit tricky to sometimes kind of get out of that shell and just go, hey, we're just going to go a little bit more casual, a little bit more trying out cards that, you know, haven't seen too much play in Legacy, and build around them to some extent and see how they go. And I think that also is just a bit of a weakness to my deck building creativity, I guess. So a huge thank you to Joe who sent it in. I really appreciated it. I really appreciated it, even if it didn't go to plan, just the way to put the deck together. Yeah, a tough one. Really tough to go 1-4. Not a big fan of losing, but I at least got a bit out of each. I think I got a good lesson out of each loss, which is more than I can say about some wins. Some wins, it's just the cards did what they did, but at least with a lot of the losses, I can look back and say, okay, in this position, I actually wasn't patient enough and I should have taken the extra draw. Or, you know what, I put too much thought into this threat when really it's not the card to think about. I should be going after something else. Even mana. I think at times sacrificing the wrong mana to Reclaimer, not having the double green for Terravore came up a bit, not having the double white for White Orchid. So a few things to work on from me as well. But hey, a big thank you once again. We'll catch you next time.